Hello and welcome to the Naru Fastcast with your hosts, Dave and Josh Masson.
Pull up a chair and listen to us discussing fasting and health-related topics. So Dave, what kind of inspired you to get into health and well-being and this kind of field that we're in now?
So when I was born 2 days old, I had open heart surgery at Great Ormond Street, and my artery is on the wrong side of my heart. So it was a long 18-hour surgery, and thankfully I was corrected. And that then obviously has led to sort of lifelong hospital appointments. And it's sort of been, obviously I've been very aware of it because every year I've had to go for lots of tests. And the sort of future of sort of my heart and things like that is always sort of being questioned, which is why they check me every year. So I sort of have a reminder every year that I either choose to sort of improve the environment and make sure I'm healthy to sort of secure the next 10 years. Because every 10 years they get and they say, well, maybe in the next 5 years we might have to do X, Y, and Z. So that's always been something that's gone through. I've also had asthma from birth. So that's been something that I've always struggled with. So from 18 months. And I've also had a big car accident where I left with a fractured back for 3 years before that was diagnosed and treated. So, but I've always been heavily in sport. I've always been, county players. I've done every sport you can imagine really, and nothing sort of really held me back. And I feel that it's one of those, sort of feel very lucky to have had that fresh start. And I feel that I sort of try not to do, obviously, been to university and things, but I try not to do things that sort of compromise that. And I feel that it's a real sort of legacy that's sort of carried on really through our family and for me really. And I feel that it just makes it a focus every day, which is
cool. So for people who don't know, what was it that you had wrong in your heart and how did they manage to correct that?
So you've kind of got your aorta, which sort of takes the blood, pumps it around, and then you sort of your pulmonary artery that sort of goes up to the lungs, and they were basically on the wrong way around. So I wasn't getting oxygenated blood going around my body. So I was born blue, and they had this procedure that was only done, the guy from South Africa had flown over that day, and he was coming over to Great Ormond Street to teach them how to do this heart operation, especially a transposition. So they, rather than keep the anatomy the same and just make a little hole in the sort of wall of the heart, they actually corrected the anatomy, so the physiology. So it was sort of groundbreaking surgery really. So I was very lucky to have it, and that's allowed me really and stayed sort of relatively stable really for till now, which is
I also feel like you're being uncharacteristically modest here, because if I'm not right in thinking, you're the second oldest survivor of the operation in the world.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
So it's pretty. Yeah, it's pretty unique because when where they cut the aorta, it's I always have leaking back into my bowels, and that obviously they look for the size of the heart. So they'll do. I get a 3D scan of my heart every 2 years, which is pretty cool. And they also put me on an exercise bike, and they also do echoes and all these types of things, and because of what they say well, we don't know at what point we need to replace that aortic arch, because obviously the more leaking you get, the harder the heart has to work to pump out the same volume of blood, and therefore that's going to lead to stress in the heart and problems. So we will replace it so that's not a problem, but then that probably leads to lifelong medication and lots of other issues which I'd rather avoid. So it's more just about, I see them, and what I like about it is that the whole time they've basically said, oh look, at 5 years old maybe you could start letting Dave go and play football, and my mum sort of sat there and been like, well, he's already been playing football for about 2 years, and in each time I've done a half Ironman, and at the time my consultant was like, well, I don't want you to do that, long distance exercises isn't good for anybody's heart, but they're like, especially with you, we don't want you to do it. Did it, had an asthma attack after, but that was another story. And I've also climbed 6,500 meter mountains, done quite a few of them, and lots of sort of Everest base camps and all these types of things. And each time they've sort of said, we don't advise you doing it, but there's part of you that sort of says, well, I feel fit, I feel good, I'm doing all the right things. And it's funny because I meet a lot of people that have had cardiac operations, and I kind of look at them and I think, wow, what you're doing to preserve that sort of lucky start that you had. And I feel like then what I do every day, it's just to me, I can't even comprehend how other people live their life when they've been given that gift. Because it was I think it was a 78% chance of death, and there was 3 episodes where they took you from bypass onto for me my heart sort of take over, and that's 3 crashes. They basically said that that's gonna be the hardest time, is taking him off bypass onto that. So I just sort of think right from the word go, it's just been a gift which has really inspired me basically to go from that to then focus on healthcare.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously from that you kind of grow up relatively healthy despite all that, and then you then just choose to partake in or pursue, I should say, a career of pharmacy, right? Yeah. So how was that kind of pursuit through pharmacy? How did that kind of influence things?
Yeah, so I think I didn't fancy the long studying in medicine, and I'd done it a little bit before. I'd sort of done some work in hospitals and done some work in community pharmacies, and just kind of really liked that vibe and felt that it was very approachable for people to give back, and I just really sort of enjoyed it. So I sort of started studying. I really wanted to do it since I was 15, so I was quite early on, and I always knew I wanted to go into healthcare, just because of the environment I've been in, and I really sort of wanted to give that back. And yeah, so it led me to doing my 4-year undergraduate masters at Bath University, and then graduating my final sort of year in practice in 2012, and I've sort of been doing that now sort of on and off for about 11 years now. So, which I absolutely love, and I feel that as I've pulled away from the very much just focused on medicine and focused onto other things that have a massive influence, it sort of really moved me away from thinking that medicine is the only way forward for health.
And how has working as a community pharmacist shaped the way in which you kind of work with, or like working with patients, like dealing with that day-to-day kind of front of house, like face-to-face with patients? How has that kind of shifted and changed or influenced you through medicine? Yeah,
so I think originally, you have these amazing medicines that you can kind of cure a problem. Someone's got a headache, you give them a tablet, and you sort of see this at the start, and you sort of, people come back and say, oh, I took that stuff and I feel so much better. And you sort of thought, oh, brilliant, and then you get embedded in communities, and you sort of get to understand people's behaviors, and you sort of find that these people using this same process of coming back to you for a problem, their problems become bigger. So they tend to have, now they're overweight and they're diabetic, and now they've got hypertension, and now they've got high cholesterol, and they're still doing the same thing. They're still presenting with a problem, getting a tablet for it, walking away thinking it's the solution. But the bit from when they leave the doctors and the pharmacy to then going home, I think I sort of, as my practice has gone on, has realized that actually that is becoming more of where we should be spending time and money, is understanding that people can go, it's like going to the dentist and seeing a hygienist getting teeth cleaned, but then you go away and eat complete crap the whole time. It doesn't really sort of make sense. It's so nonsensical. And as we're sort of realizing that 90% of disease states are really caused by the environment that you're putting your body in, the genes and everything, it sort of made me rethink maybe how I approach healthcare. Even in my practice now, it's very much been turned upside down. Really.
Cool. And then, so you go through your training as a pharmacist, you become a community pharmacist, working with patients on a daily basis. When did fasting become a part of your life?
Yeah, so I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago. And there was just some research that came out that had done some trials with some with people that had given two sets of groups the same diet, but they had restricted one group of about 20 people to consume the same food but in a short period of time, and the other people could eat it when they wanted to. And then after they looked at the sort of biomarkers of that, they did so their insulin levels went down, their blood sugars went down, their health parameters basically all improved. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. So I thought, well, let me try that, because that's something that could be interesting and it might be easy to do. And it kind of just got so easy that I thought, crying around like this. And the other thing was, for me, was, we've got quite a sort of lean family, and I've always been, food has always been I've always been sort of so obsessed with food. I've been so hungry all the time. And one of the things it did do is it liberated me very much so from that constant need for food. And it then allowed me, rather than making sort of impulse decisions on hunger, it sort of allowed me to be like, right, well, okay, I'm going to not eat until, say, 11 o'clock. But when I have that food, I'm not going to be sort of ravenous for it, so I can actually make something, or if something comes up, I don't then just think, I've got to go and get them the easiest thing. And again, diet is always diet and things outside of your traditional is very easy to skip, and it's the easiest thing not to do. And I felt that sort of fasting every day gave me that focus for my platform, for my health every day.
Why do you think it's important that with Naru Nutrition, what we're currently doing, trying to advise people not just on fasting, but overall health topics and ways to improve your overall general health and well-being? Why do you think that's important, opposed to just focus on fasting, telling them what they should fast, and just only focusing on that aspect?
So you can't say, for example, you take the circadian rhythms, which is like a natural rhythm that runs through our body, and it sort of governs the release of hormones and responses to our body that helps us to wake up and sort of go to sleep. And when you look at that in the body, it's such a prominent feature in our body that the World Health Organization actually class anything that has an impact on that rhythm as being a carcinogen. So it's pretty important. So when we sort of look at what affects that rhythm in the body, well, you've got sleep, you've got nutrition timing, so fasting, and then you've got sunlight. So even if you take the most basic principle of sort of rising the sun, going to bed when the sun goes down, and why that is important and what happens to your body when you fight against it, those sort of just are basic principles. So the fasting doesn't stand alone then. So if you just look at that impact, and what you find is that there isn't just one thing. So it's not just your microbiome in your gut that improves your the gut-brain axis improves your health and mental health and digestion, reduces down inflammation. It's also then what you put in your body, and other things can obviously have a massive impact. And we sort of find that fasting is great at the bottom as a foundation. I really do believe that. But it also just won't go the distance on its own. You can't fast your way out of a bad diet. The same thing as abs start in the kitchen, as they say all the time. And it is really true. You do need to have more strings to your bow when you are trying to look at developing a healthy lifestyle. Because if you've got a bad marriage, you've got bad habits, you've got you drink, you smoke, you do all these things, but you go to the gym, you eat well. It has to be, your health has to be a focus across the whole spectrum of what you do.
The kind of consciousness around health as being something important, something that's ran through our family, as you've already talked about from a young age with your health complications and everything you went through. I think also on top of that, with mum being in something medical, dad was always into sport and in leisure. I think there's always been this undercurrent of being healthy and looking after yourself. And I remember mum not really like feeding us a lot of like junk food and stuff of that nature. And not for any reason other than the fact that she didn't think it was appropriate. And then I don't think we really enjoyed it. And that was just kind of probably really fortunate, because I think our dad was kind of the other way growing up, where it was very much on the sense of, a lot of rubbish food, basically, which then led to his type 2 diabetes and stuff of that nature. So I think that's an interesting point there, because we've both been fraught with you of your health complications you were born with, and then obviously the accident, neither one your fault, but highlighting health. The idea that dad ended up getting type 2 diabetes, reversing it, and that's a story for another podcast. But I think what it shows is that health hasn't just been this linear thing where we're all genetically gifted with being super lean, being really healthy. Like, you had to deal with those battles at a very young age. Dad had type 2 diabetes, so, the propensity for obesity and those metabolic diseases is in our family, albeit environmental, but the habits around it existed within him, and that could have rubbed off on us. So I think health's always been something in the picture and in front of our minds. We've all been into sport. You and I more than Ben, who's our eldest brother, but played golf at a very high level. So, we've always been into that. And I think when you're into sport, and like dad coached badminton, I played a lot of badminton. And when you're around that all the time, you just feed off of it, right? When you hang around with mates who also play a lot of sport, look after themselves, like you stick around that, right? Who you spend time with is who you become. So if you're, in a healthy family, you've got healthy mates, you naturally are going to move towards those behaviors. It's kind of inevitable, really. And so that was kind of, I guess, my start and my journey into health was probably through exercise, healthy habits, and having a healthy community around me. And
you've obviously gone on and through your studies and chosen a career in osteopathy.
Yeah, so I never knew what I wanted to do as a kid growing up. I wasn't particularly academic. Obviously, Ben, our oldest brother, was super, super smart. Wanted to put him like 2 years above. You went on to do academic things with pharmacy. I wasn't academic, right? I got an A level in sports science, PE basically, and art, completely unrelated. And I just thought whatever your A levels are is what you got to do, right? And it wasn't until I went and got treatment from an osteopath. Mum booked me in, had a bad neck. I was like, I don't have a clue what this is, but let's try it. And he said to me, he was like, you ever thought about doing it? I was like, no, I don't have the grades. And he was like, well, there's this thing called access courses. And I was like, what's an access course? I always just thought whatever your A levels are is what you do. Anyway, look into it, found out you can do access courses. So I did it. So for a year, I would get the train from Devon to London on Friday night, sleep on my sister-in-law's couch, and then go to lectures on Saturday night, travel back down to Devon. I'd be working in Tesco's on Sunday, Tesco's on Monday, and then Wednesday Tesco's, and then study back up on Friday. Did that for a year, passed, got into my master's, the osteopathy course, which is like yours, and undergraduate master's degree, and then excelled when I got there, right? So did my 4 years, and I had a bit of a strange journey out of that, because my journey through osteopathy was very, very different to the one with yours at pharmacy. A very, very high push towards not using medication and healing things naturally and allowing the body to do the things it can do. And I always used to get this people asking me, like, isn't it always weird? Like, do you get in loads of arguments with your brother? And looking at that, like, there was some sort of like juxtaposition between the two professions, which I guess from the outside there is, but I think you and I are, open enough people to listen to each other, and we could see the benefits of both. So I finished up my 4-year master's, actually went straight into running a business, which was also something new. Went on to lecture biomedicine, and things of that nature. So I've been running a business now for 6 years in London. So yeah, that was kind of my journey from health as a child into osteopathy, and then to where I am now.
And there's something I always sort of like about you is that you do always try everything that you kind of bring to your patients. And I mean, obviously we can kind of segue into your sort of fasting story, but there is also which you might be able to mention, a range of things that you've done, as well as fasting that has really sort of brought you to where you are now. Yeah,
so I think my struggle, and this might be another good thing to talk about with my journey through health, is that because I've been fortunate in the fact of my body composition, but I'm naturally lean, but I don't put on weight very easily. So I've always had to try and find this balance in my life of being, okay, if you read like, oh, how do I put weight on? All it is just like eat loads of calories. Like you've got a fast metabolism, or maybe slow, whichever way you look at it. You can eat loads of rubbish food. And the problem is you're going to go, okay, fine, I'll try it. And then a week in you go, I feel awful. And so I always had this balance between, okay, well, I know I need to eat more calories, but I don't want to feel bad doing it. And so I ended up trying like everything from raw vegan all the way up to carnivore and everything in between. The raw vegan, vegetarian, omnivorous, paleo, keto. And the thing was, is that I was constantly in search of this thing of going, okay, well, how do I achieve the goal of, putting on weight, exercising, having the mental clarity that you want that comes with good nutrition, putting on muscle mass, all the rest of it. And it was this constant journey of being like, okay, I can't do this, I'm trying to find it. And as you go through those processes, you learn so much about each nutrition and the ways of eating. And then what's happening is, as you're also a practitioner during that time, you're kind of seeing your patients and you're kind of going, well, when I cut this out, when I cut wheat and dairy out, let's say, I felt really good. My digestion improved, or particularly wheat. And you're going to go, okay, you get a patient who comes in, you're chatting to them about their back pain. They say they've got indigestion problems. You're going to go, why don't you try cutting out wheat? They cut out wheat and they feel better about it. And that's not always the case with everyone, but it was this trial and error. It's kind of going, okay, this is working for me. I wonder if it'll work for someone else. So that was a big journey through that, with just helping people really. And that's what it was born out of, I think, for me. When I came out of osteopathy, you learn how to help people with musculoskeletal problems, lower back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, knee pain. But then what's happening is you've got someone sat in front of you and they've got really bad depression, or, they crippling anxiety, or they've got digestive issues. And what you realize is that the anxiety is also precipitating neck pain or the shoulder pain or whatever it is. And you're going to go, okay, well, it's a blunt instrument if I just try and attack the neck, the shoulder with just my manual treatment. It's like, okay, well, I need to be able to help these people with the other sides of things. So you start researching those other sides of things. And before you know it, you are starting to use these things on yourself, right? You're starting to learn how does it affect you if you use this type of tool on your mental health? How does it affect you if you eat these types of foods? And then what you do is you do it for long enough that you then apply it back to people. And then you start getting the feedback from them, and they kind of going, oh, they're trying it and it's working. And you go, okay, well, it worked for me, it worked for that person. Let me do it on another person and another person. And it keeps going. And, it was a bit of a cavalier response, I guess. But I just think that too many people preach things that they're not willing to do themselves. And so I think I'm someone who likes to, and I think we both share this in common, but lead by example, right? You don't have to, you've got an incredibly clean diet, mine not so much, right? But the point of it is that you're still leading with example through your behaviors. And no one's squeaky clean, no one's perfect. Perfect's like the lowest standard, right? Because it's unattainable. So never let perfect get in the way of good. And that's what I do. Right? I just do my best of what I can, right? And that's what I tell other people to do. Look, you're not trying to turn people into squeaky clean health freaks. It's like, no, just like, which areas are you struggling with? Which areas are going to have the biggest impact that I can help you with, and let's help remove those obstacles.
And I like that, and I think that's where you've always been sort of very transparent with what you've done, and I think it's always especially with you, that the way that you have got a very high metabolism and yet you still fast, because a lot of people always come up to me and they say, oh, well, I can't fast because I want to gain muscle. And I find with like all the little things that you've kind of done, and I see it with your practice as well, that you do sort of take snippets of everything and put it together. And like you said earlier, you do apply what you show. And I think that's something that we both very much do. And I feel that we do lead by example, which is something else you sort of alluded to. And do you find that by sharing your experiences with your patients, you get better results than sort of almost preaching to them about something that you feel like you maybe...
Yeah, 100%. In the same way that I'm being open that, I don't have the cleanest diet, or maybe, fall flat on other things, is that I think when people realize, when you don't hold yourself as this paragon of perfection, that actually you kind of go, you know what, I also sometimes, like to eat these things. I sometimes struggle to do this. It just brings you onto a level where people can relate. They always say that people don't buy from you when they understand. They buy from you when they feel understood. And I think there's a real thing about when you make people feel understood. And I think a great way of doing that is creating a leveler where you come down and you kind of go, look, I'm like you, right? I'm not some thing that needs to be put on a pedestal here. I've maybe got more knowledge and experience than you do, but I've also felt those things, right? And I think that there's a real benefit to having that approach when it comes to people. And I think when it comes to fasting, it's funny you say that about the metabolism thing, because I intermittently fasted for 1.5 years, every day for 1.5 years. I fasted through all my clinical exams, everything, when I found it about 6-7 years ago. And I lost too much weight, right? Because I am someone who's naturally lean. I wasn't eating enough calories. I didn't understand that process. And I did start to lose muscle mass. But the point of it was that I stopped exercising. So there was no stimulus to those muscles. So there was no chance of protein synthesis or it being used. And I was in a constant calorie deficit potentially. So those two things combined, not eating enough and not exercising, it's not going to work. If you read any of the literature around fasting and muscle mass, pretty much as long as you're continuing to weight train and stimulate protein synthesis, you are going to maintain, if not put on, muscle mass. So I think it's a massive misconception, because the bodybuilding world, what used to be growing up, was kind of, got to eat every 3 hours and 6 to 8 meals a day, and it was this continuous feeding cycle, and it worked. It really did work, and we saw that. So when fasting comes along and people say, well, you can actually fast and maintain, if not add muscle mass, it completely goes against the grain of everything. And I think it's a challenge for people to kind of get that around their heads, but it's the case.
If you could sort of name 5 things that you do that have made the biggest impact on your health, what would you say they were?
The 5 things that I've done make the biggest impact on my health. Daily fasting is 100%. A little bit like you alluded to, it creates structure, it creates discipline. I think beyond that, the health implications that are going on in my body from fasting, from extending my nighttime fast, are probably far beyond my comprehension. So fasting's by far the best thing that I've done. The second thing is sleep, prioritizing sleep. I've prioritized sleep for years, and that has had a massive impact. And I guess wrapped into that is the importance of morning light, lowering the lights in the evening, light exposure to help me sleep. So sleep's been a massive one. I think finding your rhythm with nutrition is one of the most important things. We get these, so many of the times these days, we get indoctrinated into believing that we have to be in a certain camp when it comes to nutrition. There's a one size fits all and all the rest of it. What was great experience going from raw vegan to carnivore was finding out what works for me, right? Getting to that point and then being comfortable in that. That was a really big thing. So that was a really big thing for health. Next thing I'd probably guess is hydration and the use of, for me, rock salt. I don't use mineral powders or anything like that yet, just because I don't particularly enjoy any of the ones that are available. But I've spoken ad nauseum for years about the importance with patients who've got inflammation and all the rest of it when it comes to their skeletal health. With drinking enough water, taking enough sodium with that. And that's been something that's been profoundly beneficial for me. And then I guess the final one is obviously exercise. The other week when I got tattooed, I didn't exercise for 2 weeks, and there was other things that I was busy for different reasons, but that was I noticed that like my energy levels weren't as high, my focus wasn't as good, my mood wasn't as good. So I really think that exercise is one of the bigger ones. And I guess the final one, if I could add a plus onto that, would be the cold plunges in the morning. When I split some time between London and Devon, and when I'm down in Devon, I have a cold plunge that I get into every morning. When I'm in London, I don't. And I definitely notice the difference in the days where I'm here and I get to cold plunge, and my productivity, my focus, my energy levels versus the other ones. So yeah, good question.
So thanks so much for joining us, episode 1 of the podcast. Next week, we're really just going to sort of focus more on, I hate using this word, but the holistic side of why we think things outside of medicine is so important for the body.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also what we'll do is we'll focus on a little bit more with our goals and vision for Naru as well. Today, we wanted to get you guys to learn a little bit more about us, our journeys, so you can get on board with us and you can understand why we're doing what we're doing and where we've come from. So we look forward to joining you next time on the next podcast, and we'll see you there.